What would you do if the thing you wanted most in the world required you to do something unthinkable? Today's stories are about people who faced that question, and the answers they chose changed everything. You're watching Unfiltered Nightmare, where we dive deep into the moments that test human nature at its breaking point. Before we begin, if you appreciate stories that make you feel something real, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And here's your mission. Convince the like button to go skydiving, but replace their parachute with a sleeping bag. Now, let's talk about desperation, sacrifice, and the thin line between salvation and horror. Arthur Penhaligon hadn't spoken to another human being in person in 4 months. Not because he hated people, but because he'd simply stopped seeing the point. At 64, he'd perfected the art of being invisible. His groceries were delivered, his bills were paid automatically. His one cousin called every few weeks to make sure he was still alive, and that was enough social interaction for him. So when Arthur woke up on that November morning in 1979 with the overwhelming urge to go outside, he almost ignored it. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat in his chest like a hand pushing him toward the door, like something was pulling him somewhere specific, though he had no idea where or why. He ended up at the coastal park, walking through trees with ocean sounds in the distance, and that's when he saw Leo. Leo was 26 years old and had been standing at various points along this trail for the past 40 minutes, trying to convince himself to take 3 more steps, just 3 steps forward, 3 steps to the cliff's edge, then 1 more after that. He'd written the note last night, left it on his kitchen table. It said the things people always say in notes like that. I'm sorry, and it's not your fault, and I just can't anymore. The words felt inadequate even as he wrote them, because how do you explain that you're not sad, you're just empty? How do you tell people that you didn't wake up one day and decide to die? You just stopped being able to see any reason to stay alive. Arthur watched Leo pace, back and forth, forward 3 steps, back 5, getting closer to the edge, then retreating, building courage the way you build speed before a jump. Other people on the trail had noticed too. A small crowd was forming at a distance, everyone frozen by the same unspoken fear. If we move, if we say something, will it push him over? But Arthur felt different. That pulling sensation in his chest was stronger now, insistent. This was why he was here, this moment, this young man. Arthur didn't know what he was supposed to do yet, but he knew he was supposed to do something. So he started walking toward Leo. And as he got closer, an idea formed in his mind, a terrible, perfect idea that made sense in a way nothing else had made sense in years. Arthur didn't announce himself. He didn't ask Leo what was wrong or try to talk him out of anything. He simply walked up beside him and put his arm around his shoulders like they were old friends. Leo flinched, startled. He looked at Arthur with eyes that were simultaneously desperate and already gone. "I don't want to talk about it," Leo said. "I know," Arthur replied, and then he said something that made Leo's blood go cold. "I'll show you how it's done." Before Leo could process what that meant, Arthur walked the 3 steps to the cliff's edge that Leo had been trying to make himself take for the past hour, and then he took the 4th step, the one that meant falling. Leo watched Arthur drop,
watched him fall through the air, his body getting smaller and smaller until it hit the rocks below with a sound Leo would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. The crowd gasped, someone screamed, but Leo just stood there, frozen, staring down at Arthur's broken body on the beach. And something inside Leo changed. He'd spent the last hour imagining what it would feel like to jump. He'd romanticized it in a way, made it into something peaceful, something that would end the pain. But watching Arthur die stripped away all of that. There was nothing peaceful about it, nothing beautiful, just a body hitting rocks and then stillness. Arthur hadn't jumped because he wanted to die. Leo could see that now. Arthur had jumped because he wanted Leo to see death clearly, to understand that it wasn't an escape or a release. It was just ending, final and brutal and real. The horror of what he'd witnessed pulled Leo back from whatever dark place he'd been living in for the past months. And beneath the horror was something else, an overwhelming gratitude toward this stranger who had sacrificed himself to show Leo what he'd been about to do. Arthur Penhaligon, a man who hadn't spoken to another human being in person in 4 months, used his last moments on Earth to speak the loudest message possible to a stranger. Your life is worth living, even if mine isn't. Leo stepped back from the cliff. He walked back down the trail past the stunned crowd. He went home and tore up the note. Arthur's death saved Leo's life, and Leo would spend the rest of his years making sure that sacrifice meant something.
Ishani and Rohan had this unspoken agreement. They'd stopped talking about children 3 months ago, not because they'd given up hope, but because every conversation about it ended the same way, with Ishani crying in the bathroom and Rohan staring at the ceiling, feeling like he'd failed at the one thing that should come naturally. December 14th, 2024 started like any other evening in their small village home in central India. Dinner was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just quiet in the way homes get when 2 people are carrying the same heavy secret and neither wants to be the first to bring it up. After dinner, Ishani went through her bedtime routine mechanically. Brush teeth, change clothes, climb into bed. She'd learned to keep her mind blank during these moments because if she let herself think, she'd start counting the years, counting the failed attempts, counting how many of her friends already had 2 or 3 children while she had none. She lay there in the dark, listening to the water running in the bathroom where Rohan was bathing. Their house felt enormous when it was this quiet. She'd imagined so many times what it would sound like filled with noise, a baby crying, a toddler laughing, the chaos of family life. Instead, there was just silence and the distant sound of water. What Ishani didn't know was that Rohan had stopped feeling like a husband 3 weeks ago. He'd started feeling like an obstacle, like the problem, like the reason his wife's eyes looked sad even when she smiled. So he'd done something he hadn't told her about because he knew she'd think he was crazy. He'd gone to see someone, not a doctor. Doctors had already told them there was no medical reason they couldn't conceive. This was something deeper, the person had said, something spiritual, something that required faith. The mystic had been clear on the instructions. The ritual had to be performed alone, at night, with absolute conviction. And it required one specific thing, a live chick swallowed whole, while thinking only of the child he wanted to create. When Rohan had first heard this, he'd laughed. Then he'd seen the mystic wasn't joking. Then he'd gone home and thought about it for 2 weeks straight. Tonight, standing in the bathroom with a small box containing a baby chick, Rohan had made his decision. He was doing this for Ishani, For them, for the family they were supposed to have.
Here's what Ashani remembers. The bathroom door opening. Rohan stumbling out in his bathrobe, his face the wrong color. The way he looked at her, not with his eyes, but through her, like he was already somewhere else. How he ran, how she chased him, how his body felt when she found him collapsed outside, already gone in ways she couldn't understand yet. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. She remembers a doctor's face changing from determined to defeated in the space of 30 seconds. She remembers the words, "I'm sorry," and how hollow they sounded. She remembers asking why over and over because Rohan was healthy, he was young, there was no reason for him to just die like this. The doctor's answer was clinical. "We need to do an autopsy." 2 days later, the pathologist made his discovery. When he called Ashani to explain what he'd found, she didn't believe him at first. Couldn't believe him. A baby chick inside her husband's throat? That wasn't possible. That didn't make sense. Then the pathologist mentioned something else. They'd found a piece of paper in Rohan's bathrobe pocket. Instructions, written in someone else's handwriting. A ritual, a promise, a guarantee that this one act would give him what he wanted most. Ishani sat in her quiet house after that phone call and finally understood. Rohan had died trying to give her the one thing she'd wanted. The thing they'd both wanted so badly, it had become this silent weight between them, this unspoken pressure that filled every quiet moment. He died because he loved her, because he couldn't stand seeing her sad anymore, because some charlatan had convinced him that swallowing a live animal would somehow fix what felt unfixable. The cruelty of it hit her all at once. She'd gotten what she'd been unconsciously wishing for, confirmation that Rohan wanted this as badly as she did, proof that he'd been willing to do anything to make her dreams come true. But the price of that proof was that he was gone, and their house was even quieter than before, and she'd spend the rest of her life knowing that the last thing her husband did was try to create the family they'd never have. Some desperate acts come from fear. Rohan's came from love. Somehow, that made it even worse.
Luca Rossi was 22 years old and had been working on trains for 3 years, long enough to know when something felt wrong. And tonight, everything felt wrong. March 3rd, 1944. World War II had turned Europe into a nightmare, and Italy was caught in the middle of it. Every day, Luca saw people trying to escape. Families, children, old men who looked like they'd already died but were still somehow walking. They'd crowd onto trains illegally, hiding in freight cars, clinging to the tops of passenger cars, desperate to get somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. The official policy was clear: report stowaways to security, have them removed. But Luca and the rest of the crew had stopped doing that months ago. How do you look at terrified mother holding a baby and tell her she can't have this one chance of survival? How do you condemn people who are already condemned? So they let them ride. Over 500 people tonight, packed into cars that were meant for cargo, not humans. Luca knew every single one of them was illegal. He also knew every single one of them was human. The choice seemed obvious. But mercy has weight, literal weight, and tonight, that weight was making the train struggle. Luca stood in the caboose, watching the mountain head through sheets of rain and snow. The tracks were slick. The coal they had was garbage, the kind that barely burned because all the good coal was feeding the war machine. And then there was the weight, all those extra bodies pressing down on wheels that were already straining.
Captain Moretti was at the front of the train, in charge of the whole operation. Good man, experienced, but even Captain Moretti couldn't change the laws of physics. Too much weight, too little power, too dangerous conditions. They started up the mountain. The train groaned beneath them, fighting for every inch of elevation. Luca's hand stayed on the brake lever, because if the train started sliding backward, he'd have maybe 3 seconds to stop a disaster. Up ahead, he saw the tunnel. That was their salvation. Dry tracks inside. Once they got in there, they'd be fine. Just had to make it to the tunnel. The front of the train entered. Luca felt a surge of relief. They were going to make it. Then the train started slowing down, and then it stopped.
99% of the train sat inside the tunnel. Only Luca's caboose remained in the open air, in the rain, outside. Luca waited for the signal. Captain Moretti should be blowing whistles right now, telling the crew what was happening, what to do next. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the engine idling somewhere in the darkness ahead. This was wrong. Luca knew it in his gut, the same way you know when you're being watched, when danger is close. Something had happened in that tunnel, and Captain Moretti wasn't signaling because Captain Moretti couldn't signal. Luca abandoned his post. He walked from the caboose into the first freight car, the one that had just entered the tunnel. It was dark. His flashlight cut through the blackness, but he kept it pointed down, not wanting to wake the people sleeping here, people who'd already suffered enough without some train worker shining lights in their faces at 1 a.m. As he moved deeper into the train, he started hearing sounds. Thumping, like something heavy hitting rocks outside. Regular, rhythmic. Wrong. The second car was quieter than the first. Too quiet. Luca had been around enough sleeping people to know what that sounds like. Breathing, shifting, the small noises that come from bodies at rest. This car had none of that. This car was silent. Luca raised his flashlight. The beam caught the first face. Eyes open, mouth slack. Not sleeping. A woman, maybe 30, slumped against the wall. Next to her, a man. Same expression, same stillness. And next to him, another. And another. The whole car was full of them. Dead. All of them. Not injured, not sick, just dead. Luca's flashlight shook in his hand as he scanned more faces. A child, an elderly couple holding hands, a young man who looked like Luca's age. All dead. All sitting or lying in positions that suggested they'd simply fallen asleep and never woken up. The thumping sound outside suddenly made sense. Bodies rolling off the top of the train, falling onto the rocks. Luca dropped his flashlight. He ran, back through the car of the dead, back toward his caboose, back toward the fresh air outside the tunnel. He burst out into the rain, gasping, and looked back at the tunnel entrance like it was the mouth of hell itself. What killed them happened because the crew was trying to help. When the train stalled, Captain Moretti and the engineers did what they were trained to do. They tried to restart the engine. But the coal was so poor quality that they needed 10 times the normal amount to generate enough power. So they shoveled and shoveled, filling the furnace, creating a massive fire to jumpstart the train. Coal produces carbon monoxide when it burns. Good coal produces some, bad coal produces more. The enormous amount of bad coal they burned to restart the train produced a flood of it. The tunnel filled with poison gas. The stowaways were already asleep. Carbon monoxide is odorless. They never knew what was happening. They just drifted from sleep into death, peaceful and unaware. Luca survived because his caboose was outside, the only car not in the tunnel, the only place with fresh air. 521 people died that night. Men, women, children. People who'd survived bombings and starvation and war.
People who'd climbed onto this train hoping for a chance at tomorrow. People the crew had shown mercy to by letting them ride. The mercy killed them. Not intentionally, not directly, but the weight of 500 extra bodies made the train stall, and the attempt to restart it filled the tunnel with death. Luca Rossi walked away from that mountain forever changed. He'd spend the rest of his life wondering if they'd made the right choice, wondering if turning those people away would have been crueler than letting them die in a tunnel. There's no good answer to that question. There never was. 3 stories, 3 people facing impossible choices in impossible moments. Rohan, who loved his wife so much he swallowed poison for her. Arthur, who died to show a stranger that life was worth living. And the crew of a train who showed mercy and watched it become murder. The truth is stranger than fiction, but more than that, it's harder, because fiction gives us neat endings and clear morals. The truth just gives us moments where people did their best, and it still wasn't enough. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment telling me which story hit you hardest. And if you want more stories that make you feel something real, subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, remember, sometimes the scariest thing isn't what people do to hurt each other. It's what they do trying to help.